Were you shuffling along through different podcasts? Well, this podcast is the real deal. It
You
won't be
pulled an
a
ace.
gambit. It's a sure bet. Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We're traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your watchers on this journey are me, Guido.
And me, Rob. Yeah, I don't have a name either.
Mr. Rob, you can be.
I had something
Mr.
last
Rob.
night, and now I forget what it was, so it couldn't have
I'll
been
be
that
Guido
good.
LeBeau. You can be Mr. Rob.
Okay. And before we begin our trip through, guess what? More X-Men. You know what's new in our section of the multiverse.
We are not an X-Men podcast, although resisting the urge is getting increasingly hard. But there are a lot of X-Men alternate universes and multiverses for us to cover. We had taken it slow our first 2 years, and now we're really leaning into it thanks to the TV show. We had Pinky in the Brain in our last episode, so we got even out of comics a little, and our next episode is going to even include a movie universe. So we're not just an X podcast.
No, but speaking of X-Men,
yeah,
Guido, I know you really love X-Men.
The other thing that's new is, people who know that I have a lot of comics will be surprised to hear I spent the most money on comics ever this weekend.
An undisclosed amount.
Undisclosed amount. That has me closing in on my X-Men goal, thanks to Joe's Comics, Cards, and Coins in Valencia, New York,
and our tax refund.
And our tax refund. He has been a really great resource and always knows to look out for those early X issues. And with the 15 or so issues I got from him this weekend, I'm down to, I think, 24 missing issues. And that's every X title ever.
And you got your earliest issue that you have in your collection, right?
Yeah, I had 6. Now I have 5. So I'm, of course, missing 1 through 4. But they are part of the 24 that I'm closing in on for every X issue ever. So yeah, if you're in upstate New York, or if you need someone even remotely looking out to get your back, Joe's Comics, Cards, and Coins in Valencia, New York has been really a great supplier of my drug of choice. So that was an exciting X update. It did not inspire, though, this episode. I had already planned out this episode.
That's true.
It was just a happy coincidence.
Well, it was all swirling in the back of your mind because of the TV show too. So it's the perfect.
Yes, and I need to finish my quest because it's just going to become harder and harder and harder.
Yeah, Deadpool and Wolverine, the eventual movie. As the TV
and like
show's
if
really
someone
caught on.
debuts in Deadpool and Wolverine, I mean, luckily I have things like Dazzler, so even though that's going up in price because everyone thinks Taylor Swift will be in it as Dazzler, like I have that. But I don't know if there's some random early character, I don't know who's in it. Obviously issue 4 Scarlet Witch Quicksilver is already so high, but there might be other ones. So luckily some of the keys I got in this lot were Banshee and Polaris, so I'm clear there. If Polaris debuts in Deadpool and Wolverine, I'm safe. I already have it. So
and the Phoenix for whenever the Phoenix saga comes back. That was another one, right, that you got. Inevitably it comes back again. Well, listeners can continue to tune in to see you get closer and closer to the end of your quest, in which I suggest that you just set them all on fire and start over again.
that was the conversation yesterday.
Here's an X-Men number 1, and here's the gasoline.
That YouTube video would get a lot of views.
Oh, it would. Sure. It would. If you want to promote the podcast, that's the number 1 way to do it. A lot of people would hate you, though, so... Well, if you're joining us for the first time, Guido has a very big comic book collection, but also we have 3 parts of our journey through the multiverse today. Origins of the story, exploring multiversity, and pondering possibilities. So thank you for coming along.
Yes, and remember to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening, and follow us on Threads, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Blue Sky at Deer Watchers.
And with that, dear watchers, welcome to episode 132, and let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with our travels to today's alternate universe. Today we serve up a spicy bowl of Mama LeBeau's gumbo. Note, I'm not doing the accent. To answer the question.
I don't even know that worked. Does Gambit have a mother? I don't know.
I don't know, but he mentioned gumbo or jambalaya in one of these issues, so that's what got me thinking.
Well, he might not have had a mother if the original plan for him that we're going to talk about went through.
We'll get into that, yes. But we're answering that question. What if Rogue and Gambit revealed the greatest secrets of the Marvel Universe to Mister Sinister?
From Mister Sinister, too. He's dead when they reveal them, so I don't know.
That's true, but they're also revealing them to him. It's also a kind of a false what if question to begin with. Really an excuse to talk about these three characters, basically.
No, I love the issue, and
the question it's a fun issue, but yes.
The question spoils the end of it, and
that's
so
true.
We didn't want to do that up front. We will spoil the issue when we get to it, but the issue is also over 30 years old, so we're good. The issue that we're talking about, though, is Earth 979. It is seen once here. This is the only appearance of Earth 979. We have, however, previously talked about Mister Sinister back in episode 47 because he formed the X-Men in a What If. We have also talked about Rogue in episodes 31 and 34. And we've talked about X-Men now in countless eps, particularly recent ones. But we have never really dived into Gambit, so we're going to stay focused on him. He is kind of the thrust of this story, if you will.
Yes. So what was your background with these three characters, Rogue, Sinister, and especially, since we haven't really talked about him, Gambit?
Well, they are three of my favorite characters in my favorite property of all time. So I love them. I mean, Gambit and Rogue are my essential two characters. I bought any comic book in the world that I could get with any of the three of them, but especially Gambit and Rogue. And there were a good number in the 90s. The two were really popular, so they both had spin-off solo titles and miniseries, and Gambit especially would sometimes show up in other people's titles, and I consumed everything I could of these three. And the story we're going to dive into is probably or the origin story that we dive into is probably part of the reason that I actually love the three of them, the way that they're all bound up together and the way that this story unfolds. So I'm a big fan, and I've been looking forward to this issue for a long time. What about you and your background with these three?
Well, Rogue, always loved, especially from the animated series and for Lenore Zan's voice, which you can hear again now in the new series, and the writing for her with all her great catchphrases. Sinister, I love the design, but I never felt like he had much of a personality then. Like, he has much more of a personality now, but he was just kind of like big scary guy.
The Kieran Gillen era of X-Men. My gosh.
But the early
Sinister
ones
would be your favorite villain ever if you read like the 20 years ago X-Men that established his personality as the ultimate sass.
Yes. Yeah, but I knew him mostly from the animated series where he was just kind of a big, dark, foreboding figure. And if I had to choose, then I would choose Apocalypse over him for like big, omnipotent.
Yeah, he was much more
villain
bombastic
character. But then Gambit, I liked Gambit a lot, but he was never one of my favorite characters. I don't know why. I mean, maybe I like gravitated more to Wolverine for like the more darker, rough-hewn characters. And I think Gambit always, I don't know, in some of the comics I read, he never seemed to be a super pronounced character. I remember reading his miniseries, that original miniseries, I guess, when it came out when I was growing up.
With the gold embossed cover.
Yeah, of course. I can picture the cover right in my head. And he also feels very 90s to me. Like, he feels like Sega as like a character.
But I think that's why I love him. I love his design. I mean, he's super attractive and he's meant to be super attractive, but his design is even fun because it makes no sense and looks great.
No,
and
it doesn't.
I loved the action figure. So I loved
I never
that
had that action
absurd
figure. Yeah.
plastic jacket. He came with a plastic
yes.
brown trench coat. I loved that thing so much. And my best friend reading comics growing up was also a huge Gambit fan. And so I think we just sort of amplified each other's love of Gambit. Rogue is my top character, but also because of Rogue's love of Gambit, I think I also love Gambit. So.
Well, we talked a bit about our origins, but let's go back to the bayou with our origins of the story.
Right now on this very show, you're going to get the answer to all your questions. Our amazing story begins a few years ago.
So there's a lot going on. There's, like always with X-Men, there's lots of characters, lots of subplots. So Guido, can you explain this mess before we introduce the books we read?
Well, we'll start with a segment for Origins of the Story with the debut of Sinister and Gambit, because we haven't gone through those. Even though we talked about Sinister, we oddly didn't cover his debut, and we have never touched on Gambit. And then we'll get into a really convoluted story. I'll give a bit more background when we get to that segment, but it is one of the there are many classic dangling threads of X-Men that is revisited for years and years and years, and clearly retconned, and clearly one writer had an idea and it just never came to fruition. And so someone else picks it up and does something else with it. And it just becomes this dangling plot thread for truly practically a decade. And that is great X-Men comic storytelling. So we'll get all into Gambit's secret and the dark secret of Gambit and the trial of Gambit plot in our second part of Origins of the Story. But let's start with these two characters.
Yeah, we read Uncanny X-Men 221. That's the first Sinister from September 1987.
And of course, Sinister is created by Chris Claremont and Mark Silvestri in this issue.
And then Uncanny X-Men 266. That's the first Gambit from August 1990.
And it is the first Gambit. I don't care that an annual came out a month before this. It is story order, the first Gambit appearance. Most people agree with me, but there are some contrarians out there who insist that it's not. This is the first Gambit created by Chris Claremont and Mike Collins on this issue. So this was probably your first time reading either of these?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of going back to what I was saying for Sinister first, because there's a little less to talk about for him, because he's only in a little bit of the issue. Mm-hmm. But he definitely gives you those kind of like Darth Vader vibes. Like he's just big and intimidating, and like Vader, he chokes somebody. But you don't get too much of the personality there, other than like he's evil, he's badass. A lot of it is the design, which Mark Silvestri's design, or whatever Claremont contributed to it as well, is just so
It's so good.
amazing.
And they know it's so good. Like the first panel of the issue is just his face. And
yes,
that is so unusual to debut a character that way, but with the fang teeth and the black diamond on his head and the white skin and the red eyes, like, and then once you get to his body and you've got the shredded cape, and he's just great.
I'm just thinking of this now. There's something Cenobite-like about him. And the Cenobites are the hell priests from Hellraiser, Pinhead, and all those. But the black leather, the white skin, the bondage element, which Claremont has in a lot of his work too. Yeah.
Could be a bit. It's 87. I don't know when is the first Hellraiser movie.
Before that, I don't know off the top of my head. So, but it must be before that. But I wonder, maybe Claremont was reading Clive Barker and getting a little bit of that inspiration there, and the Britishness, right? Because he's supposed to be British, right? Originally, Nathaniel Essex. He doesn't have a British accent on the animated show.
Well, it's not clear too, because yes, he lived there 120 years ago, but
yes, I guess your accents could change over that time.
So I don't know that he's supposed to sound British when he speaks. I'm sure he speaks with some sort of affect, though, of course, because he's, especially again in the last 20 years, he's quite the dandy, and that's what makes him so fun.
And so, what about?
Yeah, it's fun. It's a fun issue to revisit with X-Men 97 in mind too, because there's just so much in it, from the composition of the team with Dazzler to the fact that you have like the Marauders and you have sort of this, I don't know, the typical soap opera mixed with the world is falling apart that makes X-Men so fun.
Totally.
So
and what about Gambit there? What do you think about this issue? Because it's really set up to like, this is an introduction. It's not like, oh, there's a character, he's over to the side. No, this is like someone crashing through like the skylight window, introductory issue kind of.
Well, he's on the cover too, which is you can see from the Sinister, for example, he's not on the cover. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that common that a character would debut on the cover. Clearly, Gambit was meant to be a major new character. And I think that what's true for both of these issues we were talking a little bit about while you were reading them, they're both part of the truly representative of Claremont's era of X-Men, where like you can't read this issue alone and get that much out of it. You need to either have someone explain to you what's happening before and it doesn't really end, you need to keep reading, or you need enough context from being like a fan of or watching the animated series that you can sort of step in, because both of these stories, there's so much going on. So in Gambit's, like, Storm has been de-aged, and you have her split off from the X-Men at this point. You have the Hounds, which is of course the whole plot that brings in Rachel Summers and introduces that future timeline. And so like, you have so much happening in this issue that they just assume you know. And
well, even the Shadow King, there's so much history there with his
there's all this allusion to the
like,
Shadow King, and he's at that point possessed the guy. Yeah, and Psylocke is in it, and so yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I love Gambit's design. The only thing that's really changed for him is, of course, the look of his powers. So here in this first issue, it's these green bolts that he charges up with. And that, of course, transitions to the like pink purple that we're more used to.
And he doesn't have the playing cards. It's like darts that he's throwing. So he never has the cards here. Assume it's something else that he throws.
He ran out of cards that day. I don't know.
Exactly. And I was asking you too if this has ever come up, but he has not just the kinetic powers and the ninja kind of powers, but he also has charm powers here. So he can actually like convince people to do what he wants through his charm. And that's
and it's alluded to a few times. Yeah. It doesn't totally get ignored, but it is definitely not a prominent part of the character.
But what's interesting is, I think, is this character, aside from those things that we mentioned, he's so fully formed here from the character that we now still know. Like, there's that debate going on now with, like, who was the creator of Wolverine. And if you read Wolverine's first appearance, it's like, that's not really the Wolverine we know. And that's true of so many comic book characters. But maybe because 1990 doesn't feel that far away, there's so much of the way he speaks and the design, the look, that is still the Gambit that we know now.
Yeah, I think that is true. Something, and maybe because it worked, it never needed to be changed. There's certainly characters who've debuted fully developed and formed, and they just didn't work, and so they suddenly get like retooled, or they get thrown into the background for years until someone else picks them up. But this character worked right away, and it becomes a main character from then on, really. There's few times that he's missing from books for extended arcs from his debut in 1990 onward.
and he does flirt with preteen Storm once, so we'll have to overlook that as something from the time.
Is it flirting? I feel like he's just supposed to be like a constant like charm. He says
though, if you were a little older, I would be. It's a little scuzzy line, but anyway.
No.
Well, let's continue
I'm not surprised,
on.
But let me just stay in there one more quick, since this is all in the world of X-Men 97 that we're having these conversations. What is so cool, and yet again in this issue, there's so much with the X-Men series, and in this case we have it's not confirmed that Val Cooper is Mystique in X-Men 97.
Yes.
But most of us fans think she is. And in this, she is. She's living as Val Cooper. And there's a whole plot being set up in the final few pages with her and Destiny and Val Cooper. So it's fun to see all these pieces from this era. They're pulling from so many eras in X-Men 97. The creators are such fans, and it's obvious, but it's fun to see in these 2 issues strands.
Oh, yeah. Well, Storm losing her powers in the first issue, in the Sinister issue, then kind of almost her story of being like separate as this little kid is so much reminiscent of Storm's story now in the series. So, yeah.
And that's right. In the Sinister issue, it's actually sort of around the life-death era. So she's met the adversary who's sort of trying to turn her against Forge at that point. So that's right. I forgot that happened in this issue.
Because there's so much happening, and now we're going to even introduce even more books.
All right. Whoa. This is an intense one. So, all right.
Okay, we have our run of 90s X-Men with X-Men 6 in 1992.
All right, so we read this. This is the eponymous, now adjectiveless X-Men, the mega boom explosion created that just dominated the comic book industry. Issue 6, Jim Lee. This is the first mention of a secret. So we now know there's something with Gambit that we weren't aware of before. Now, it's important to remember that they're using Claremont's plotting still for a lot of this run, for the early parts of the run, but they're definitely deviating from it. He's now left in a very negative departure. So anyway, Sabretooth in X-Men 6 mentions Gambit's got a secret. This is the first mention of that.
Gambit's got a secret. It sounds like a 90s like R&B song or something like that.
Well, Sabretooth's outfit in this issue, he could have been singing it. He was like in a suit. I love that he's supposed to be like cleaned up at this point. Yeah.
Then we have Uncanny X-Men 325 and 326 in 1995.
All right, so here we are a few years later. This is now post-Legion Quest, which we have talked about on this show because it kicks off Age of Apocalypse. And so when they return from the Age of Apocalypse, everything that happened right before has an effect. And in this case, Rogue and Gambit kiss right before the M'Kraan crystal crystallizes Earth 616. So now we know that Rogue has a sense of a secret, but she can't quite make sense of the memories. So here we are 3 years later, like starting to move through this idea. Gambit's got a secret. Now Rogue knows it's dark. It shouldn't be shared. There's something going on. They might even maybe say that it's betrayal, but we don't yet know what's going on here.
Well, the intrigue continues with X-Men 45. That's the most Rogue and Gambit issue that we will probably focus on today. That's from October 1995.
Yeah, so this is a key issue in this arc. It includes Mister Sinister. And so this is from Fabian Nicieza and Andy Kubert.
And finally, Uncanny X-Men 350, The Secret is Revealed in the Trial of Gambit. That's from December 1997.
All right, so this is Steve Siegel writing. It's coming right off, though, Lobdell's longtime arc, so possibly using the plots of that. It's got Joe Madureira on art. This is actually the end of his very iconic run of X-Men. He's with Andy Smith. Inks are by Tim Townsend, Vince Russell, and Dan Panosian. Colors by Steve Bucoletto. Letters by Richard Starking's Comic Craft. And edited by Bob Harris. So, here we are. I don't know where to start, but you were the outsider in this. I guess, first, was it fun to revisit these different eras of 90s X-Men? You got some Jim Lee in there. You've got pieces of Claremont. Lobdell was, of course, like the 90s X-Men writer for a while. You got Fabian. You got Joe Madart, which you were not a fan of. So how was it visiting all of these pieces?
I think it's a mixed bag, frankly, for me. Maybe because I didn't grow up reading them as much, but I don't know. When I read the Claremont that we had read earlier, jumped out at me much more. Like, these are also very super verbal, and there's so much going on. It was a little hard to follow in some parts, even as we kind of get up to the kind of climactic Trial of Gambit issue. But I don't know.
Well,
what about
zooming in on X-Men 45? So this is the Rogue and Gambit issue. Rogue is on the run, but Gambit goes to confront her about like them moving past this. How did that hit you? Because that's a iconic issue in their relationship.
Yeah, I liked kind of their back and forth, but I think because I couldn't quite tell how much Rogue knows. So, because Rogue, as you said, with a kiss, she's absorbed some of Gambit's memories, but she also doesn't actually know the full memory, and he won't tell her. So for me, it was maybe a little too much kind of like, tell me what you know. No, I'm not going to tell you what you know. Like, and that beat hits about like 3 or 4 times within the course of those 2 issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of building up the secret. I guess that's what I'm saying in terms of like the secret, which is very leaning into the soap opera elements of X-Men here, where there's like something happening, but we're not going to tell you what it is.
Well, before we reveal the secret for our listeners who maybe haven't read this in 30 years or ever, what you're saying in terms of the buildup and what I said in the sort of introduction to this segment, when you had these writers who were plotting out multi-year arcs, huge stories that they didn't have to rush to pay off, then different writers stepped in, you got these redirections in these stories that were confusing. And of course, I started telling you and made you read a little bit about Gambit's origin, even being an example of this. So when the hints of this started, and it's very fun that I have a very clear memory. I'm a teenager at this point when these are coming out. So I can remember perfectly, like, as fans, we were all like, oh my God, this is finally paying off. What is happening? What's going on? How is Gambit tied to Sinister? And then around the same time, Sinister reveals there's probably a third Summers brother. So most of us thought that Gambit was the third Summers brother. He's got the red eyes. So that connects them both to Sinister and to Cyclops. And we, at this point, know, and it is actually around this time that we know that Sinister was involved in the orphanage that Scott was at. And so there's like lots of ways that this is building up in excitement and trying to pay off dangling threads. And there was actually an intent for Gambit and Sinister to be not really clones of each other, but as we understood from comic book resources doing some research into Claremont's intention, Sinister was supposed to be an avatar, a villain created by a little kid. And then Gambit would be the avatar hero that was created and being controlled by the little kid. So that was supposed to be sort of a link. And then, of course, in X-Men The End, Claremont, in this alternate universe that we haven't read yet, but will one day, he makes it that he was actually cloned from him.
Cloned so clearly from Scott.
Yes, but Sinister controlled that. Sinister had all the DNA and did that. So clearly he wanted these characters bound up, and that's not what ends up happening here.
No. Which, it made me think too. I was saying to you too, if he's a clone of Scott, that Remy has some characteristics of Corsair too, right? They're like the swashbuckling, like ne'er-do-well characters as well. So if there was like something with the DNA there, you could see, oh, he's more like his father than Scott is like his father as well.
Yeah,
like if
true.
you're buying into it. Yeah. But yeah, it comes to the head in this. Yeah, no, it does not.
So in the trial of Gambit, which we're going to background everything about the trial of Gambit being in Antarctica and it being Eric the Red and Joseph, but it's revealed that it's Magneto. And okay, we're going to set all that aside.
Well, we should just say, we should explain a little bit, because if people are confused. So Eric the Red, it's revealed that they've all been captured in Antarctica by someone who's Eric the Red, and he puts Gambit on trial, and then we'll talk about the reveal. But then at the end, there's another reveal where Eric the Red is actually the real Magneto at this point.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter to the Gambit plot.
Sure.
So in the Gambit plot, the big reveal here is that he was the reason that the mutant massacre was able to happen. The mutant massacre, of course, being the iconic event from literally a decade in our timeline earlier, where Sinister and the Marauders go and attack the Morlocks and kill a bunch of the Morlocks and rip off Angel's wings, Warren's wings. That's when he becomes the Archangel and gets the metal wings. And so it's a really dark and horrible moment in this big event, the Mutant Massacre. And here it's revealed and retconned, of course, it wasn't actually set up, that Gambit was the one working with Sinister, helping the Marauders find where the Morlocks are. I guess because he's a master thief, he could figure this out and help them navigate it. It's not totally clear. And so as this, first it gets revealed that he worked with Sinister, and that's the first betrayal. Then it gets revealed that he led them into the Morlock tunnels. So then Warren is really outraged. So you just get these layers of he might have been responsible in part for this horrible thing that happened. So what did you think of that? I know you probably weren't too familiar with even the Mutant Massacre.
Well, I had heard of, I knew of that, and I guess because I wasn't so invested in it, it didn't have the impact for me that it probably had on many people when they were reading it at the time.
I don't think it did have a big impact, though, because I think what's tricky about this retcon reveal, it's almost a little anticlimactic. It was even anticlimactic in 1997, because it's like, okay, fine. Like, like whatever. And it's not because the Mutant Massacre isn't a big deal or anything. It's like, as Gambit even points out in this issue, like Rogue was a villain working for Mystique.
Yeah.
So this idea that like, oh, the big, dark, horrible secret that we have to put Gambit on trial for is that he worked for Sinister and participated in something that ended up being horrible. Because they're really clear in this, like he actually saved the person who the Morlock.
Yeah, he didn't know what was going to happen.
So like he didn't know they were going to do this, and then he tries to like save people that are coming out as they're being massacred. So it was not that big a reveal. It's clear that they just didn't know what to do with this secret, I'd say.
Well, I think the most interesting question that it raises is what you were just saying in terms of going from a villain to a hero. And he says, all this happened before I joined the X-Men, and I'm an X-Man, and like I'm a different person, like I've changed. And yeah, Rogue, you had a similar thing, although I guess she wasn't responsible for like this huge massacre, did other bad things. But I think that's the most interesting question that this issue raises, is like, what does it mean? When have you changed? When can you be forgiven? How many good deeds can erase bad deeds? That kind of question for me.
Yeah, and that would have been interesting, and it does get explored. I mean, Gambit's exiled for a bit here, gets a solo series for a while. Obviously, this is a major rupture in his and Rogue's relationship. They do recover from it eventually, but really it's years and years and years and years and years later. It's probably actually another decade later. So
yeah, and I can see ramifications of some of that, and I know this obviously happened in the comics as well, but with Magneto now on the animated series and in comics, of course, as being someone who's gone from being a villain to a hero, back again, and then back again, like, but what does it mean? At what point can someone truly be a hero and it can erase these bad things? It seems something that's somewhat inherent to X-Men as a whole, as a property. We even see it here with Sabretooth's story, kind of in the issues leading up to this, where he wants to be reformed, but he did all these really horrible things. And was he an evil man? That's even the question they ask.
Well, and like, he's lying. He's lying to them, just so you know.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that, but yeah, that is interesting question of like, okay, at what point can he be like, are you just evil, and when can you actually reform? I think it's something that's being asked over and over again in these issues and in X-Men.
Well, you have it with the Morlocks too. There's a whole Morlock plot actually in 325, right? So this is 2 years prior to the trial of Gambit, probably before they even decided what the trial of Gambit was going to reveal. You just have these other plots going on in the books where there's now this faction of Morlocks that want to kill humans, and can they be redeemed? And Storm has to deal with the possibility of killing one of them, which she does, although Marrow survives. So yeah, lots of ongoing questions, I'd say, constantly in X-Men about redemption.
Okay, well, let's deal out a new hand, and that new hand is exploring multiversity.
am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
So we are asking the question, what if Rogue and Gambit revealed the greatest secret of the Marvel Universe from Mister Sinister? That is What If 100! And it is called What If starring Gambit on the cover, though the story is titled Paper Skin, and it's from September 1997.
It is written by Ivan Velez Jr. and co-plotted with Klaus Janson, who does the pencils and inks, colored by Glynis Oliver and lettered by Chris Iliopoulos. So a bit on that team, actually. Ivan Velez is a favorite. We've gotten to see him on a panel live. He's openly gay, Latino creator, so I love him. He did a lot of milestone work, actually, for DC in the 90s. Created Tales of the Closet, which was actually with Hetrick Martin Institute, the queer organization that actually has a high school in New York City. Did a sort of soap opera series of gay and LGBTQ characters in New York. And then for Marvel, didn't do too much work, but a few dozen Ghost Riders and some Venom and Abomination, and then has done other creator-owned stuff outside of all the milestone media. Klaus is, of course, mostly known for the art and co-plotting with Frank Miller on Daredevil with Elektra, the death of Elektra, etc. So the iconic Daredevil images, Klaus either inked or would sometimes do the full art. He's inked a ton for DC and Marvel, and then has drawn and done some art and written some, won awards, and has hundreds of books to his name. So those are the creators. I think we should give a summary up front.
Sure. So I didn't write it down, so I'm going to do it from memory, which is that Gambit has been stealing various things for Mister Sinister, doing jobs for Mister Sinister, and of course there's like the proverbial like one last job that Mister Sinister brings him in to do. Yeah,
and what I should have led with actually is, here's what's really interesting about this issue. This issue comes out before Uncanny X-Men number 350. So only a few months. Whether this issue was sitting in the hopper and they pulled it out then, I have no idea. It's weird timing, because clearly at this point, editorial knew that they were getting ready to go to the trial of Gambit. And I would hope and imagine they knew what the secret was. And then we have this issue, which doesn't know what the secret is and tells a different version of the secret, though that's not quite the what if question. I guess we could make it the what if question. But so like you're saying, the big secret, the betrayal, is that he's stolen things for Sinister, including Cerebro files. So he's given Sinister the files of Cerebro so that Sinister has access to every mutant's background.
Yeah, and so he's on the outs with Rogue and the X-Men, I guess, assumingly because of that. He's
no. This follows. You assume this follows X-Men 45. Rogue knows there's some betrayal, but she doesn't know what. So, and that's clear when
she knows about the Cerebro files
in the bedroom.
Yeah.
But so that's the secret at this point. And then, like you said, there is this one final job where Sinister needs some unnamed object in a box, and he describes that collecting all these boxes, it's been really hard for him to find all these boxes, and he's been collecting all these boxes, and they have revealed to him the secrets of the world. They have revealed to him how everything happens, how it will happen. They've revealed to him things about the mutants and the humans and what leads to their destruction and every secret, and he's collected them over the years, but there's this one last one he needs, and it's been really hard to find. And Gambit had already exchanged the Cerebro files for the cure to the legacy virus. So we see Gambit's being motivated by doing good. And for this one last job, Sinister says, I'll cure Rogue if you get me this one box I need. And so Gambit obviously is motivated to do that because he's like, okay, I'll do this. We can end up together.
So this one last box is like in this. It's like in the perfect intersection of like the Daily Bugle and the
I don't
Baxter
fully get it.
Building, and it's under
and
the
it's
ground.
underground, and
He
there's a
keeps
whole
going like
civilization
below,
down
and
there.
they're kind of like the Mole Man's like followers, but a little
But they're
different
not.
as
Yeah.
well. And then they get this box, but Rogue has followed Gambit down there to see what's there. They get into a fight because she says like, "You're working for Sinister. How dare you? You get this box." He reveals, though, to her why he did it with the potion, and they debate it for a bit, and then ultimately Rogue decides, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take this potion, and your belief in this is trust making me believe. So she takes the potion, they kiss, and then Gambit like convulses. We guess we don't.
Gambit's
really fully know.
Gambit's dead, and Rogue has absorbed Gambit.
Yes,
so the next time we see Rogue, she is drag queen Rogue. She has like a square jaw and a 5 o'clock shadow because she has fully absorbed. She's
got
Gambit
the trench coat now instead of her little coat. She's got the trench coat
and his powers.
And
so she goes and confronts Sinister.
Yeah, and Sinister's got the box, and he's doing like an occult ritual and stuff, and he's about to like release the powers of all these boxes.
Right,
when
he's
going to
open all the boxes, and the architecture of the multiverse is going to be revealed.
Yeah, she's got the kinetic energy, so she throws the throwing card. She's in shadows too, we should say, for a bit, so we think, oh, it's Gambit. Well, I didn't think it was Gambit. I knew it was Rogue. But she throws the showing. She kills Sinister, and of course, then she's going to like look in the box. The
box breaks open.
The box breaks open, and in the final page, we see what's in the box. And
I love this moment.
Issues of comic books of the X-Men and X-Force and all the different.
It's all the Marvel comics.
All the Marvel comics. Yeah.
It's all the Marvel comics. So. Yeah. And that's an important summary because this is one of the very hard to find volume 2 issues of What If that is not digital online. So I hope you enjoyed our version of it. I'm going to start because I love this book a lot. It's very simple. It's
basically sense. 3 characters, really. I don't think anyone else for like even has a line
it is only 3 characters. But even the motivations are all very clear and simple. It's clear to me. I think this actually would be a better Trial of Gambit reveal because it's clear to me like, okay, I get, especially having Gambit motivated to cure the legacy virus is really compelling. At this point, the legacy virus is uncurable. It's killing mutants. No one knows what to do with it. And so the idea that he would trade for the cure this information makes sense to me. Rogue's motivation and resistance to Gambit and his more questionable acts, I love that. I don't like Gambit dying, of course, because that just seems ridiculous to me that this kiss kills him and he gets absorbed. But what, of course, I love, because our regular listeners and I love meta stories about stories. And so I just love this end. I don't know. I want more of it. I love it. I love this idea that like what Sinister's going after is Marvel Comics, that somehow they have encoded the universe into comic books. It's fourth wall breaking. It reminds me of like some of the more modern Loki series that do some of this stuff with stories and have him actually be in a comic and know he's in a comic, or Deadpool, of course, eventually knows he's in a comic. And so I love it. What was your reaction to it?
Well, unlike you, were surprised when I said, oh, I guessed the ending, because you were like, oh my God, didn't that shock you? And it's like, I only really got it. I wasn't sure what was going to be in the box until we rejoin Sinister, and he says something along the lines of like, this is going to give me free will. What's in here, like whatever spell or whatever I'm doing is going to give me free will. And then as soon as he said free will, I was like, oh, because he's being controlled by the writer and it's going to be a pencil or something. I knew it was going to be something related to like comics in the end. So I wasn't like completely surprised, but it's got a very Tales from the Crypt, Twilight Zone. We've talked about that stuff like before for What If, but this has that really like that really leans into those kind of tropes that you would definitely wouldn't be out of sync for like Rod Serling to suddenly appear.
No, and
and
it's
go,
very
like,
it's a very like monkey's
they-
paw, like be careful what you
uh-huh.
wish for kind of plot, of course. I mean, my only complaint is the art.
Yeah,
That's
the
my
art
only
does
complaint.
seem rushed.
And that's Jansen's style in a lot of ways. I don't know if he was particularly rushed here. I was surprised he did the inking over his own pencils himself. But there are some of those scenes, it's especially when Rogue becomes Rogue Gambit, where it's kind of hideous. Like, I want that last page to be gorgeous, and it's weird. Like, I don't even know where it went wrong, but like the 5 o'clock shadow on her face almost looks like she's got like a blob over her face. And that is like on the page. It's not a production error. There is like something wrong with that page.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
They're not being, Ivan and Klaus weren't being like ahead of their time with like non-binary representation in 1997, I guess.
Well, no, I mean, maybe they were. I don't even care about that. I'm saying the art just doesn't look right. There's something wrong with the art.
I thought it was maybe
about that. No,
I thought it was maybe the scan we were looking at or something like that.
It's in the print issue. No, it's in the print issue.
Well, the same thing with like the
wrong.
little like humanoid folks that are like I said, I wasn't sure if they were the Mole Man's people or just another. Some of it I think is just because they're not super sketched out. Like you can't really super tell who they are. So they just also seem like rushing.
All of this is Jansen's style, which is very sketchy and loose. But I think here it's fine in a lot of the panels, but some of them I want more detail or I want more attention being paid to how it looks.
But I think you're right in terms of the simplicity. That's what we've often said about these what ifs, like so many of them bite off more than they can chew, and this one really just is trying to tell a super simple story, and like that trope that we all know of, like the one last score, and that it's always going to go wrong for the thief, and that the big boss that he's working for is not up to no good, is up to no good. All those kind of things are filtered in through this story.
And the world doesn't deviate. I mean, some of the what ifs that are really good have really complex world building, and this one is not. What's different here, this is sort of what you're saying, but it's interesting because generally I feel like you and I don't like these. This is a what if where the plot is what's different, not the world. The world is exactly the world we know. And now with the one sort of weird thing where they don't know what Gambit's secret actually is, and so they create a hypothetical secret here. Because again, I don't think that's the point of this what if. I don't think it was like, what if the secret is he's trading Cerebro files? It's like, no, that's not the point of this what if. So outside of that one little detail, this is completely in our world, meant to be consumed in 1997 comics with the characters we know and love from 616, Gambit, Sinister, Rogue. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it's one people should definitely track down and check out because I think it is really also unique. Again, that meta storytelling thing has shown up so many times now. This is probably one of the earlier iterations of it, certainly in the big two. So do you want, before we move on, do you want to go back to Earth 979?
I don't. I guess it would be interesting to explore more stories where the characters know that they're comic book characters. So maybe not necessarily going back to see Rogue specifically, but going back to see like someone else who is stumbling upon this kind of discovery.
Yeah, well, there are other examples of that. I can point you to them.
So yeah,
but I
guess
agree. I don't think we need to go back to this world. I think it's just a good story, but it's good because it ends. There's not any place to go with characters.
That's true. It is like an end. But before we end, let's talk about some pondering possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted, averted, averted?
I just watched that episode of X-Men animated series again last week.
It's like, I know where that's from. So, Guido, what are we talking about for our pondering possibilities?
Well, this is mostly for fun. We can speculate on the TV show and talk about other things, but I've been really eager for you to read, although you claim you were rereading it, but I'm unsure if that's true.
I definitely read it.
The Rogue and Gambit Wedding, because I reread the Rogue and Gambit Wedding after X-Men 97 episode 5, and I think it is some of my favorite comics there are from an era where there's not a lot of great comics coming out of, especially X-Men titles. So I wanted us to read it and figured it's a good culmination to these stories to see where Rogue and Gambit stories sort of end. I mean, obviously they're still characters, but this is an important moment.
So this is X-Men Gold, issues 26 through 30, Till Death Do Us Parts 1 through 5 from June 28th.
Till Death Do Us Parts 1 through 5.
Parts 1 through, okay, there we go. From June 2018 to August 2018.
So it's written by Mark Guggenheim, penciled by David Marquez, though sometimes with help from Michelle Bandini or Geraldo Borges, inked by David Marquez, sometimes with help from Geraldo Borges, colored by Matt Wilson, sometimes with Arif Prianto, lettered by Corey Pettit, and edited by Darren Shan, Chris Robinson, and Jordan D. White. Mark Guggenheim is most known, especially prior to this, for being a TV writer and creator. The CW Arrowverse in particular, he did a ton of writing for, and DC comic books for the most part. David is just extraordinary and does mostly DC. I think he was exclusive for a while, now creator owned, and I think just has some of the most beautiful art. And in fact, a page from X-Men Gold 30 was certainly the first like expensive original comic art page I ever bought, and it is framed, hanging on our wall with a display light, and one of my favorite issues of comics ever. Every time I read it, I am, my eyes water. I am on the verge of tears. I love this story.
Yeah, so
so if you don't stop talking.
Well, just in general, you were saying about like this era in comics. I don't know. I actually liked the writing here and the art here more than the 90s one, which might be more iconic. But like, there's a lot less dialogue. It's a lot like there's a lot more jokes.
Fast-paced.
Everyone is like everyone is super witty. Like Nightcrawler, especially, he's got like a lot of good jokes, and Kitty's got a lot of good lines. The art is like beautiful, and yeah, it just feels so much more succinct in that way. So I don't know, for my brain, I was able to digest it a lot easier.
Well, this is from the era too, which we have not really left, where stories are constructed around trade paperback collections and collected editions.
Yeah.
So every writer is being told to write generally 5 or 6 part stories that then can be a collection. And sometimes that's bad. Sometimes there's a story that should have only been 2 issues. And sometimes it's really good because it means that the writer has created a clear arc in their mind. And this for sure was huge, a massive plan, because spoiler alert for a comic that's 6 years old, but if you haven't read it and you don't want to get spoiled, then you should definitely stop listening and come back after you read it, because there's a huge twist on it. So pause. Okay. Clearly this was totally planned out for a long time, because you have Kitty and Colossus's engagement happening, and you have not years, but you have a year or maybe 2, many issues of buildup. We know a wedding's going to happen, and they're marketing the hell out of a wedding issue, and they're confirming a wedding is going to happen, and they promise that a wedding is happening. We get the solicits for a title that's confidential to come out after, and so we might have known it was called Mr. and Mrs. X at that point. So it's like, okay, wow, this is neat. They're going to marry off 2 X-Men. And then the huge twist is the just stunning moment when Kitty phases Colossus's touch when he's going to put the ring on her hand, and phases into the ground and can't marry him, and decides she can't do it and has cold feet. And then the twist, of course, being that we've gotten this very subtle background buildup where Gambit is realizing like he wants to commit to Rogue, and the 2 of them are deeply in love, and he proposes to her in that moment and says, let's do it right now. And they get married, and it's just beautiful. And it's making me want to cry right now. I love it.
Yeah, I think that one panel that you mentioned where she's facing through as he's putting the ring on is just like stunning. It's like, oh wow, that's just one of those great. Well, it's a great combination of the writing and the art, because the art is great, but oh my gosh, of course, the character who can become transparent, and it's the ring going in, like that is the perfect moment to have her back out. Like there's no other better way to do it. Like 10 out of 10s right there. It's just so powerful in that moment, and everything like leading up to it, and you have Colossus's sister who's maybe sowing the doubts in Kitty, but like she feels bad, so you're following her story as well. It's just great how like all these different pieces are kind of going into the main story and kind of what Kitty is then gonna experience. And I think like what you said, like the Rogue and Gambit thing is happening just on the periphery, so it is not so much like hitting you over the head where you're reading this and going, oh okay, this is what's gonna happen.
Those two are gonna get married. Yeah. Well, and that's where Guggenheim, maybe being a TV writer or just his strength as a writer in general, like the way he can tell this character-driven story and have it sort of build, and even his sense of why Kitty and Colossus shouldn't get married, I think is perfect. Like they flash back and they love each other, and there's no question about that, but like they were teenage sweethearts. They loved each other as kids, and they're something else now. And they were so excited when Colossus was resurrected, and then when Kitty came out of she was in a bullet for traveling the galaxy for a long time. So when they got like reunited, they were so excited, and it was like, oh, let's start our relationship again. Let's do this again. But they're not the same people. And so it just makes total sense that they wouldn't be together, that he's like sort of a hopeless romantic, and he's always been the poet, and she realizes she's not Kitty anymore. She's soon to be Kate. So yeah, I love that. And then Rogue and Gambit just being together, and you asked if they were still married, and yes, they are. I hope writers have realized you can just have a happy couple and it still works for really good storytelling. They've had some great miniseries as a married couple. They've been featured in the Krakoa era at times, and I think they'll just be together at this point. They're really so good together.
Yeah, so. I loved it. I mean, I got a little bit teary reading it as well. And the lead up to it is great too. I think like the whole idea of like Colossus being kidnapped at his bachelor party in Vegas is just also just like a very fun concept there. And it's like mixing it with like this mass genocide like plot, which is like what there's so much of in X-Men, but the fact that even that heaviness does not make it not still feel light and fun, because it's easy just to go to like a very dark place with that, but Guggenheim's able to keep it still feeling light and like this romp, even though this kind of nameless not nameless, but this generic scientist woman who wants to just kill all the mutants is also happening at the same time.
Yeah, so if anyone hasn't read this, go read this also. I am also convinced, spoiler alert for X-Men 97, I'm convinced Gambit will have to be resurrected at some point, and I think that they will get married on the show. So I just definitely want it to happen and hope it happens, but I feel like I saw little breadcrumbs of it in some of the episodes, especially episode 5. There was little bits of like Gambit where I was like, he's getting ready to get married. And he's not.
You're gonna see since Kitty and Colossus are not characters really on the animated series, I wonder if some of their plot will be put onto Scott and Jean on the animated show, where they of course they are married anymore, but they're not the same people. One of them might not literally be the same person, and that
they're struggling with memories,
and break up, and that it then goes to these other characters who have also had this relationship.
Yeah. So some of the best X-Men examples of quintessential X-Men today: soap opera, dangling plot threads, multi-year arcs, drama, romance. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I loved talking about all these with you and continuing our slow descent into becoming an X-Men podcast.
But for now, dear watchers, that is a wrap. Thank you for listening. I have been Guido LeBeau.
And I have been Mr. Rob.
The reading list, the rather lengthy reading list, is in the show notes, and you can follow us online at Dear Watchers.
Leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
In the meantime, in the words of Uatu, keep pondering the possibilities.